All right, we're on week 12. We're going to talk about socioeconomic status and social class for our beginning clinical skills and culturally responsive therapy. The objectives of this is that we're going to be able to define socioeconomic status, which is often talked about as SES, and social class, including the distinction between the objective socioeconomic status and our more subjective social class, also often talked about as SSS. We'll be able to name the key figures for socioeconomic status, SES, and social class, and be able to discuss the clinical implications for and relevance of the concepts of socioeconomic status and social class in therapeutic practice. Before we get too much farther into this, I want to take a second to talk about the fact that very often, if you go look up socioeconomic status and social class, they're going to be used as synonyms. Um, and so, if you just try to like Google this or find lectures about this on YouTube, these are often talked about as synonyms, and we're not talking about them as synonyms today. It's totally understandable why these are talked about as synonyms because social class is much more subjective. It's a lot harder to define. It's a lot harder to study, but it's pretty easy to study socioeconomic status, or at least it's easy to like define it and put it on a survey, right? So we want to make sure that for this particular lecture in this class that we recognize we're teasing those apart a little bit, and we are not conflating economic status with social status. Um, as much as that will get completed forever in your future. And that we as therapists recognize that like just because somebody has a certain income doesn't mean that they have a certain social status. And just because somebody has a certain income, it does not mean they always have that income and does not mean that they have cultural capital required for a specific social class. And that we are aware of this as therapists and aware of those differences, and that we're being very careful about our implicit biases. To go back to an earlier week of the class, we're being very careful about biases. I also want to point out that this class will bring together a lot of the concepts we've been talking about all year. In the videos and in our talks, we're going to talk about things like implicit bias. We're going to talk about things like opportunities, like discrimination. We're going to talk about, all sorts of things that kind of come together in this that we've discussed over the rest of this year when talking about those beginning clinical skills in culture and culturally responsive therapy. So starting out, we're just going to start out with this concept of socioeconomic status. And I actually couldn't find, so as you know from my previous videos, I really like it if I can find even somewhat unrelated clips, which sometimes makes it a little disjointed. But I'd like it if we get a chance to like virtually meet um the key figures, at least to some extent, to get to like hear them talk and see them move and like listen to them. I think that's important for understanding these concepts and how they came about. And that said, the two key figures I want to talk about for socioeconomic status, I really just couldn't find any videos on either of them. One of them, it made sense to me. He died in the 1920s. One of them, I really thought we'd be able to find. She was with us until the 2024, but I just couldn't find any videos from her. So instead, we're gonna watch this video about the anatomy of opportunity by Candace Robertson James from a TEDx talk at Villanova University. And I really like this one because she really goes into these concepts that kind of tie the rest of the concepts we've been talking about in the class into social status, and into this idea of like social status and socioeconomic status um, being around opportunity.
I used to envision a society in which children were healthy, happy, nurtured, and encouraged to blossom. And then I taught middle school. And I quickly learned of the many challenges so many children are faced with. My first wake-up call were the gunshot drills. I mean, we had fire drills growing up, but we never had gunshot drills. And then so many mornings would begin with, "Miss Robertson, can I speak with you for a minute in the hallway?" followed by stories of violence, abuse, trauma, and I often wondered how I could help my students be successful. And now, since becoming a mother to my 10-month-old son and 3-year-old daughter, I'm constantly consumed about their success and health. And while I admit I do love reading the parenting magazine, and I believe that most of the major parenting lessons can be learned from watching the Cosbys, I know that there's more to ensuring their success. There are so many challenges that they'll face, and so many detours that could divert their destiny. From what I've gleaned from my teaching, research, and community health experience is that for many people, it seems the answer lies in providing people with real opportunities for success. But what exactly is a real opportunity? Well, it may be easier to begin by thinking about opportunity stressors or things that deprive us of our opportunities. These can be things like generational poverty or inferior education, as 22% of children live in poverty, and differences between funding and education can be as large as $10,000. These can also include stressors, the violence, abuse, and trauma. Research shows that 2 in 3 children report physical health symptoms linked to stress. And I saw this in my own students, as they would often complain of headaches and stomach aches and just not feeling well. These stressors leave children boxed and feeling trapped in and limited by their circumstances. But ultimately, the answer lies in the inequalities, as our failure as a society to provide everyone with the conditions that promote health and success. As I began to think about building an opportunity landscape, I started with Erik Erikson's psychological stages of development. And Erikson starts with trust in infancy, and he talks about how it's important to build trust. And then he continues into early childhood, and he talks about the importance of autonomy and independence, exerting power and control over your environment, and developing skills and talents. And then he gets to adolescence, and he talks about the importance of identity. Identity. That was where I got stuck. I believe that one's perception of their selves begins long before adolescence and continues throughout adolescence. As I look at this little girl staring in the mirror, there are so many things that will influence that reflection that she sees staring back at her. The gender and other norms and stereotypes, the messages, the relationships she has, the discriminatory experiences. All of these things will influence how she sees herself, who she believes she can become, and what she believes she can do in our society. One of the things that struck me with my dissertation research with Black women was their discussion of this fight that they're in, this fight to prove themselves, their worth, their value. What does it mean to grow up in a society that has so many predetermined messages about who you can become and who you are? I believe all of these things will influence that reflection that little girl sees staring back at her. And that's important to think about that as we think about how to give people real opportunities for success. I would like to propose to you an anatomy of opportunity that first begins with macro level factors. Attention to equitable policies, equitable health, education, environmental policies that promote health and wellness. And by equitable, I don't mean that we all receive the same resources, but that we receive the resources necessary to produce the same outcome, health and success. What if we evaluated our policies based on the outcomes, health and success? I remember one particular day as a teacher. It was standardized testing day. And a student came to me and asked if she could speak with me in the hallway. She began to tell me of a story of what had happened the night before and expressed her concern and worry over her mother. And I had the task of trying to encourage her to focus on the test that she needed to take. This test that would undoubtedly follow her for years to come. And I often wondered about this with other students as I thought, how could they focus on learning the scientific method or their spelling words for that week for the matter when they had such larger concerns of safety and wellness? The answer became clear attention to equitable policies. Policy reform was needed. The second component of this anatomy of opportunity includes micro-level factors. First, in childhood, I believe we need to cultivate creativity, curiosity, and confidence. One of the things that amazes me about my daughter is that she can create an end to any story, and she has a solution to every problem. Both of my children constantly remind me of the innate curiosity of children and the importance of always building confidence. I believe these are the cornerstones to building real opportunities for people. And then in adolescence, I believe we need opportunities for engagement, leadership, and critical thought. Adolescents need to be engaged. They need to know that they are an active contributor to society. Their voice needs to be heard. Leadership opportunities through school, sports, faith communities can allow them the ability to have responsibilities for others and commitment to outcomes. And critical thought. Despite growing up in an information age, it's more important than ever that adolescents begin to learn how to decipher fact from opinion and be able to reject negative and limiting norms. And in adulthood, we all need opportunities to pursue passion, efficacy, and virtue. I've always believed that if we would all enact on our passions, we could make such a difference. While we don't all have the same passions, everybody is passionate about something. And if we would have the efficacy or belief and confidence that we could actually make a difference, and the virtue and courage to put ourselves out there and try, then I believe we could all change the world. And lastly, I would like to propose a development of an opportunity team. The opportunity team could consist of mentors, family, friends, students, teachers. And the purpose of the opportunity team would be to serve as a buffer against adverse experiences and promote health and wellness. Could you be a part of someone's opportunity team? Is there a family member or friend, a student, a classmate, a peer, or perhaps someone you haven't even met yet, who you could share your experience with, your expertise, your story? I mean, the version with the bumps and the bruises and all the challenges you've encountered along the way, so that when they reach their own, they'll have hope to know that they can overcome too. Could you be a role model to someone? Could you inspire creativity? As I think about my own opportunity team, I think about my family and friends, mentors who've encouraged me, inspired me, who helped me to believe in myself, who helped me to break free of the boxes of fear and limitation, and who always protected that image I saw staring back in the mirror. While we can't wave a wand and erase all that's been done, could we create equitable policies and strong opportunity teams for people? Could we inspire creativity, curiosity, and confidence? And could we advocate for innovative strategies to pursue our passions? I believe if we could do all of these things, we would actually be able to provide people with real opportunities for success and wellness. As I reflect on my students and my own children, I'm left with a quote my mother introduced to me as a child from Macy Jemison, the first African-American female astronaut, who said, "Never limit yourself because of others' limited imagination, and never limit others because of your limited imagination." Thank you.
So while you listen to this, there's a lot of words that she used that we've been talking about throughout this course, right? Around discrimination and biases and opportunities and adverse stresses, right? That it really tie everything together. But one of the things she brought up very early on was there's this difference of like 10,000 of up to $10,000 in income, or not in income, in money that's given for helping with education and stuff like that, and that affects things that matters. That's a little bit of what we're talking about with this idea of like socioeconomic status and social status. So if we want to define socioeconomic status, we're gonna go to the American Psychological Association for this one, for looking for definitions. We're gonna use them for each of our three definitions for today. And we're going to look at the materialistic approach to conceptualizing socioeconomic status, which emphasizes the attainment of goods and services such as education and healthcare, as well as access to information and social resources. Prior research has noted that the relationship between socioeconomic disparities and health or achievement outcomes, advocating for improved access and changes to material and structural factors that impact health and well-being, is also an important advocacy tool and can promote policies and programs that can help reduce socioeconomic disparities. I just noticed that it just says citation here. I actually copied and pasted this out of the American Psychological Association. So now I'm curious. I want to go back and see if that was the link text that was copied there, or if they forgot to go back and put in a citation. Um, I may have to check on that for next time. But so if we're talking about key figures, like I said, I could not find any videos for our key figures, which made sense in the case of Max Weber, since he died in 1920. He was born in 1864 in Russia, which is now Germany. And he died in 1920 in Munich, Germany. He was a German sociologist, economist, and political theorist, one of the founders of modern sociology. Some of you who've taken sociology courses probably recognize his name. He was a professor of economics at the University of Heidelberg and developed foundational theories of social stratification, distinguishing between class, status, and party. He argued that economic position shapes life chances, like access to opportunity, security, mobility, and he advanced the idea that social class was not only about income or socioeconomic status, but about market position and access to power. So again, like just back, what was it, week 9? We were talking about power dynamics, right? So this concept of like socioeconomic status, subjective social status, and social class really do encompass a lot of what we've been talking about. And then I also want to talk about Nancy E. Adler. She was born in 1946 in New York, New York, and she died January 4th, 2024 in San Francisco, California. She was an American health psychologist and professor at the University of California, San Francisco, UCSF. She's the founding director of the UCSF Center for Health and Community and pioneered research on socioeconomic status as a health gradient. She's also a bridge figure if we're talking about all of these concepts, because she also introduced and operationalized the concept of subjective social status, SSS, in health research and demonstrated that perceived social rank also predicts physical and mental health outcomes independently of the objective socioeconomic status indicator. So again, remember I said at the beginning of this that the reason that we conflate these two is because it is very easy for us to measure socioeconomic status or think that we've measured it just by asking like income, right? But that's not the whole picture. And subjective social status and social class also impact independently of socioeconomic status. So we talk about clinical impacts. What does socioeconomic status mean for you and self of the therapist? As therapists, we need to examine how treatment models often assume schedule flexibility, financial liquidity, reliable transportation, stable housing environments, predictable work hours, access to childcare, supportive networks, and we need to try and work around these. I sometimes go to lectures and will sometimes have like at the start of the lecture they'll be like we need to ensure privacy, like if we're doing telehealth, especially around the I guess especially around telehealth lectures and trainings, that if we're doing telehealth we need to make sure that like the client's on their own and can do things on their own, and like there's not kids and stuff like that. And I always have a little bit of a like, oh, because I worked with a lot of very marginalized folks, and the kids being in the room is super, super common, right? Like super normal. And I'm not comfortable as a clinician being like, no, you can't have your kids in the room, or I won't do therapy with you. Um, and that said, I come from a lower socioeconomic status myself. So it's just something we need to keep an eye on when we're doing this, that we're not inadvertently recreating these dynamics that just can't be reached by folks that don't have the socioeconomic status we might be assuming they have. And then if we're talking about what does socioeconomic status mean for our clients in clinical sessions, socioeconomic responsive therapy includes asking concrete questions around logistics, not just emotions, collaboratively identifying barriers to follow through. I really like to use Maslow's hierarchy early on in therapy and just talk about that like very first part of the pyramid where we're just checking like are our needs being met. We want to modify treatment plans to align with economic realities. We want to provide case coordination, referrals, or documentation support when needed. And we need to recognize that like missed sessions or inconsistent engagement may reflect structural strain rather than avoidance. And then we move from the concept of socioeconomic status into this concept of social class. Um, I want us to listen to a little bit. This is not specifically about social class. I couldn't actually find any videos from Bell Hooks where she talked a lot about social class, which I was very disappointed. I could have sworn I'd watched some at some point. I was very disappointed I couldn't find any. So this one where she's just talking about interlocking systems of domination. It's very short. But again, I think it's just so important for us to get to kind of like virtually meet or virtually see these key figures and how they are real people when we're talking about the concepts that they were central to.
I began to use the phrase in my work, white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, because I wanted to have some language that would actually remind us continually of the interlocking systems of domination that define our reality, and not to just have one thing be like, gender is the important issue, race is the important issue. But for me, the use of that particular jargonistic phrase was a sort of shortcut way of saying all of these things actually are functioning simultaneously at all times in our lives. And that if I really want to understand what's happening to me right now at this moment in my life as a Black female of a certain age group, I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking through the lens of race. I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking through the lens of gender. I won't be able to understand it if I'm only looking at how white people see me. I mean, one of the to me, an important breakthrough I felt in my work and that of others was the call to use the term white supremacy over racism, because racism in and of itself did not really allow for a discourse of colonization and decolonization, the recognition of the internalized racism within people of color. And it was always, in a sense, keeping things at the level at which whiteness and white people remained at the center of the discussion. In my classroom, I might say to students, that when we use the term white supremacy, it doesn't just evoke white people. It evokes a political world that we can all frame ourselves in relationship to. And I think that I was able to do that because I grew up, again, in racial apartheid, where there was a color caste system. So that obviously I knew that through my own experiential reality, that it wasn't just what white people do to Black people that was wounding and damaging to our lives. I knew that when we went over to my grandmother's house, who looked white, who lived in a white neighborhood, and she called my sister Blackie because she was dark and her hair was nappy, and my sister would sit in the corner and cry or not want to go over there, I knew that there is some system here that is hurting this little girl, that is not directly the direct hit from the white person. And white supremacy was that term that allowed one to acknowledge our collusion with the forces of racism and imperialism. And so for me, those words were very much about the constant reminder, one, of institutional constructs, that we're not talking about personal constructs in the sense of how do you feel about me as a woman or how do you feel about me as a Black person, but they really seem to me to evoke a larger apparatus. And I don't know why those terms have become so mocked by people because, in fact, far from simplifying the issues, I think they actually, when you merge them together, really complicate the questions of freedom and justice globally because it means then that we have to look at what black people are doing to each other in Rwanda. We have to, and we can't just say racism, what have you. We have to problematize nationalism beyond race in all kinds of ways that I think there's a tremendous reluctance, particularly in the United States, to have a more complex accounting of identity.
That is bell hooks, and I know you have at least one, if I'm remembering correctly, there's at least one reading this week that is from bell hooks. So maybe have an idea of like her voice as you're reading through that. As we talk about social class definition, the American Psychological Association says that social class encompasses both socioeconomic status, SES, and subjective social status, SSS. Although social class may often be included in psychological studies, it is often treated as a control variable as opposed to a main variable, or a moderator or mediator of a relationship. As such, these practices do not allow us to examine the role of social class in predictive relationships, nor potential class related differences among constructs. And then if we look at the American Psychological Association's definition of subjective social status, it says that SSS is defined as one's perception of their social class relative to others. Measures of SSS are usually subjective and take into account a person's judgment of their human, social, and cultural capital. It is important to note that SSS assessments do not necessarily need to accurately account for one's economic position. Rather, they are focused on understanding an individual's perceived social standing. And if we look at key figures for this, we just heard from Bell Hooks, born in 1952 in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, died in 2021 in Berea, Kentucky, and is an American author, cultural critic, feminist theorist, and social activist. She was a distinguished professor in residence at Berea College, and she wrote extensively on the intersections of race, gender, and class, emphasizing how symptoms of domination are interlocking. She centered lived experience and voice in discussions of class and argued that class is not only economic, but cultural and relational. She also critiqued academia and institutions for reproducing class hierarchies while claiming neutrality. And then Pierre Bourdieu is born in 1930 in Dinguin, France, and died in 2002 in Paris, France. He was a professor of sociology at College de France and developed a comprehensive theory of social reproduction, explaining how inequality persists across generations. He also introduced the concepts of economic capital, cultural capital, social capital, and symbolic capital. And likely you have heard me use the words cultural capital and social capital, either in this class or other classes at some point, as a way of discussing how you or I or our clients interact with the world. I think those are really helpful terms to know and to be able to use and like know what they represent. And as this like additional almost currency to spend that not everybody has access to. And then he also argued that institutions reward dominant class cultural norms while presenting them as merit-based. And I absolutely agree with this. And if you don't agree with this, that that's okay. This is a hard thing to, I think, come to terms with sometimes. Especially for like really high performing folks. Like, don't get me wrong. I've got a bachelor's with three minors and had like earned like the president award for my for my bachelor institution, and I was the speaker at the graduation for one of my masters, and I've got two masters and a PhD. I absolutely like feel like I have earned those things and that those are merit based, and also I can recognize that I had opportunities that others may not have. And in some ways I didn't, right? Like I've been very open about the fact that I didn't go to college until I was in my 30s. College just really wasn't an option for me before then for a number of reasons. So in some ways I didn't have opportunities that others have, but absolutely I had opportunities that others didn't have in college and as I pursued my degrees. And some of those were based on how I was seen versus how others were seen, and recognizing that there are these dominant class cultural norms that even if I worked really, really hard for something, that these were still at play in some ways, and in some ways they worked against me. That I had to work harder than some folks did, and that is just reality. And Dr. Baudet is part of who helped start that discourse, start that discussion in social studies. Now, these are important concepts if we then take them and look at clinical impacts. Um, Around what does social class mean for you, yourself, for the therapist? We need to understand that we bring our own socialization into the room, including beliefs about what counts as progress, how emotions should be expressed, how help should be sought, what responsibility individuals have since versus what responsibility systems hold. I don't know how many times I've heard somebody be like, "Well, my client just blames everybody else." And then when I start talking to them about this stuff from my perspective, I'm just like, oh gosh, that sounds really, really hard for the client. But we have two different perspectives going on, right? And then how authority should function in relationships. Without reflection, clinicians, we can really unintentionally center dominant class norms, even if we're not part of those dominant classes, because of what is taught and reproduced, even at clinical training, right? And we really, and like we look in the DSM, right? Around what is considered healthy, what is considered appropriate. And then class awareness requires noticing how professional culture itself carries class coded expectations. We learn these very, very quickly, and very quickly stop noticing them. So just having that time of reflecting on that and recognizing that. What does social class mean for our clients in clinical sessions? Class aware practices involves making sure the structures and expectations of therapy are explicit rather than assuming we need to be really, really clear. Inviting discussion about prior experiences with institutions, education, or authority and therapists, recognizing class-based mistrust or discomfort as adaptive responses, avoiding interpretations that frame differences in communication or worldview as resistant. This is really, really common, and we don't want to do that. Exploring narratives of mobility, sacrifice, and belonging when they're relevant to what we're working with. So our key takeaways here are that SES, we're talking about like material access to resources. Social class is this like lived position within hierarchies and powers of meaning that includes SES and it also includes SSS. And that it reminds us that people respond not only to what they have, but what they believe they have, or that like cultural capital, social capital that folks have. And that culturally responsive therapy requires attending to both structural inequality and lived class experience, and that ignoring either of these things really risks us not understanding what's going on with our clients. And then for like looking forward and follow up activities, um, these ones are a little bit fun, but like go play, or maybe not, I guess, depending on your experiences with Monopoly. Go play Monopoly. Monopoly is a great game to go play. To like kind of look at like some like socioeconomic stuff that plays out really quickly, right? There's also another game. It's called SimSoc. It's around a simulated society. It is a tabletop game, and I do have the manual for it. So if you would like to play SimSoc, and you cannot get a hold of the fifth edition manual for it, let me know, and I'm happy to share mine with you. This is like another good one to like play around like a simulated society that explores socioeconomic status and concepts around that. So I hope you had a good time learning a little bit about these concepts of socioeconomic status, subjective social status, and social class. And I'm looking forward to getting to talk about this all with y'all.